Start over. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Agriculture and Natural Resources Budget Committee today. We're going to be hearing from Secretary Mike Beam, Secretary of the Kansas Department of Agriculture, regarding grasslands. And we had a conversation just out in the hallway that it was a nice enough day that I wanted to have class out in the grass, but instead we will just stay inside and talk about grass. So welcome, Secretary Beam.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members, for scheduling a little time to talk about a subject that I enjoy talking about and listening to others, and that's not just grasslands, but Kansas grasslands. So we have some slides. I'll try to use that to keep on. Oops. So let me start with the value of grasslands. And when you think about grasslands or grazing lands, you predominantly think about agriculture. And there's a reason for that, because it does have a vital part of the beef industry, and the beef industry contributes directly $22.9 billion to the Kansas economy. And we have about 6 million head of cattle in Kansas. So the beef industry is the largest sector of agriculture and relies quite extensively on our grasslands. The next slide. Okay. So this breaks it down a little bit more. Now that cattle prices have had a welcome increase in value over the last few years, we did kind of back of the napkin calculation, but I think conservatively you can say in many cases that, you want to go back one, that sometimes 1 acre of grassland that's properly managed with some rainfall can really generate a value of about $300 to $400 per head when you think about the gains on that 1 acre. And having less grazing land means we have less opportunities for grazing cattle. And right now, the United States has the smallest beef cow herd that we've had in 70 years. You've probably heard a lot about that when there's conversations about beef prices. But for us to ever think about increasing our cow herd, we have to think about the base. You usually think about the base, and that's the access to grassland. And I would say that restoring some of the poorly managed land comes at a much higher cost than conserving it as we have now. So I really like this next slide because obviously, okay. Obviously, you know, I have the interest in what the agriculture value is, but over the years when I've worked with various stakeholders on grassland, we get a lot of people that have an interest, and we have a lot of similar agreements because the grassland obviously supports the beef cattle industry, but it also has a very important part of improving and protecting water quality, stream flow, and our water storage. It also helps reduce erosion and reduce the risks of wildfire. And importantly, too, that brings a lot of people under the tent for grasslands is it provides wildlife habitat and supports pollinators. And I would say if you look at the species that have been suggested to put on endangered species list over the years, a lot of them depend upon the grasslands for their existence. So it's all of that and even more. So when you think about what are grasslands, it's a whole bunch of species. There are other herbaceous plants, forests, forbs, shrubs, sedges, etc. But sometimes in these areas, particularly if you look in the tall grass prairie of the Flint Hills, if you carve out a 3x3 square, sometimes you'll find 30 to 40 species of plants. I have not been able to identify them all yet, but once upon retirement, I may focus on doing a better job of that. So in Kansas, we have over 15 million acres of native grasslands. 30% of this is native grassland, 15 million acres of grasslands in total. And what's important to note, and many of you probably know this, but these are almost all owned privately. Now, unlike other states, we have largely privately owned grasslands and agricultural lands for that matter. So here is a map of the ecoregions of Kansas. When we got ready to work on getting input from ranchers, we thought we ought to kind of identify the ecoregions. We relied on the scientists. So you'll see left to right, you've got the Arkansas lower river lowlands to the left, all the way to the Cherokee lowlands to the southeast part of the state. Probably an easier way to look at that would be these core grassland areas, and I did bring the map that we have that we utilized when we went out across the state. But these are kind of the areas that people think about normally: the Flint Hills in the eastern part of the state, the High Plains, which would be a big chunk there in central, north central, the Smoky Hills off to the west, and then the Gibson Hills there in south central part of the state. All somewhat different by the species, all very important. So this is the thing that probably drove a lot of interest and angst, I would say, and that is woody encroachment. So early on in 2024, I met with scientists and some ranchers, and they have actually documented the change that's going on in Kansas. I shouldn't say not just Kansas, but the High Plains. We're losing acre by acre to woody invasion every day. And in fact, it still boggles my mind, but the scientists have claimed that in Kansas alone, we lose enough grasslands to other plant species a year that would support 157,000 cows. That's a tenth of our cow herd. So you can see what the impact of that is, and if you add that year upon year upon year, it's pretty significant. So we started with, been called a grassland initiative, but we've collaborated with a lot of folks. But I want to particularly mention the Kansas Association of Conservation Districts. They were a part of this project, a big part of it. And then USDA's Natural Resource Conservation Service, who have range scientists employed that are very dedicated to our grassland and very knowledgeable. And then there's a lot of other grassland experts that we relied on, not the least of which were the ranchers. So we really kind of ginned this up in the fall of 2025 when we went out and had some listening sessions, really almost like focus groups. And we had some in each of those 4 core areas that I mentioned to you. I think the picture here is, that might be Wells. It is, Wells Community Center. So we went out with a very specific set of questions about ask from their concerns, what their observations are, their recommendations. And we did that at the very same thing at each of those areas. And I think we had about, let me go to the next slide. Yeah, I think we had about over 55 people at those. And then we put those in a public survey. And we only gave people about a week to fill it out. We really tried to do a big push on social media about it. But we had 214 Kansans in 65 counties participate in the survey. And they were asked to respond to the same questions that we asked at those meetings. So the result of that is the issue brief, and I think you have that. It's just off the press from last week, and we're quite proud of it. I would encourage you to peruse that, and maybe if you need copies to share to people who would like one, let us know. Obviously, there's digital copies available. But I think what's important to note is that this was inspired by ranchers. The whole idea of trying to raise more visibility about our grasslands, more education, more awareness of the threats, was from the ranchers. So when we started out on this project, we wanted to make sure that their voice was loud and clear. and actually they had the opportunity to comment on drafts of this as we went along. Here's what we heard. We heard a lot of suggestions, a lot of concerns, but we boiled it down to a few that were quite common and consistent. And the first one was more Kansans need to know and understand the importance of our grasslands and the significance of those grasslands. So there's some bullets underneath that particular action item, but you'll see we do need to address the woody encroachment in our public spaces. And I would just tell you that I've already had conversations and meetings with Kansas Department of Transportation, and we've already started collaborating on what we can do to help, conserve the grassland areas along the right-of-ways, which amazing. If you visit with them, find out they've done a lot. There's a lot to do, but they've been a very good partner. Actually, it's probably been suggested that we do a statewide campaign so people are more aware of the grasslands and the threats. Oklahoma has done this, and they've have really good graphics on Facebook that talks about the loss of water from certain sized trees, the infestation of ticks that come along with increased populations of eastern red cedar. There's just a whole host of things that make for good social media. That is done by scientists. The artwork itself isn't, but the information was put together by them. The other thing we heard is that ranchers would like more help in controlling the invasive species. One of the ways in many cases, particularly on woody species, is prescribed fire. And there's lots of challenges to prescribed fire. Obviously, you're taking on some liability. It takes equipment. And so if there's something the state can do to help, particularly with the prescribed burn councils who are volunteers, they get together and try to put more prescribed burn on the ground. We need more research about some of these areas and continue to work with our producer-led organizations to coordinate and implement conservation efforts. And also, as you'll see that last bullet, I think encourage our agencies, other state agencies and federal agencies to set an example by maintaining grasslands in our right-of-way and our public managed lands. What we also heard is that grasslands are increasingly being promoted as being good hunting potential with the presence of trees and brush for wildlife. And we heard a lot of complaints about that. So again, I think there was awareness and education. One of the recommendations is to work with wildlife and parks and the sporting organizations so they have maybe a different perspective on our grasslands, and maybe letting them grow up in trees may not actually be helpful for the species that they're wanting to conserve. I think more research, again, on best management practices on our grasslands, and really support policies that keep land and ag production. The other one is there are still a lot of unknowns and questions about the economics related to grasslands. I used that $400 to $500. That was just a quick math, but I think taking a comprehensive look at that, and also since there is a lot of interest in the grasslands for hunting, that we ought to include the recreational aspect of that and the cost, not just the benefits, but the cost of that as well. One of the things that repeatedly came up by concern from ranchers is that as they looked across their community, a lot of the land had been purchased by people who really didn't care or want to be involved in production agriculture. A lot of it is probably for hunting. And what's happened is, particularly Gary, Representative White, in your area, in those Jip Hills, it's just massive forests of eastern red cedar and some other trees in those areas where that's occurred. So the question becomes, is that agricultural land? Should it be appraised by use value for taxation purposes? There was no strong recommendation other than we need more data. We should probably try to figure out a way to get data on the number of acres that have transgressed from working agricultural grasslands to non-working lands. And so before anybody can suggest any policy, I think we need to get a good handle on what we're up against. There was a recommendation to have an employee at the state that would work with the various agriculture interests, the conservation groups, and other to keep grassland as an important aspect. And I believe you have responded to that in a recommendation that you made in our budget. So the next, what's next? Like I said last week, the public release went out about the issue paper. Obviously, this is an opportunity to share it with you and others, but we've had a lot of interest. The timing was really excellent because there was Kansas Natural Resources Council had their meeting in Manhattan last week, and that's really an organization of many different types of conservation environmental groups, and then they actually even had a meeting to talk about what we could do together on grasslands. And I wish I could be there, but I was told that they were actually stroking this, thinking this was really great. So at this point, I'm going to stop, respond to questions. But before I do, I want to make some acknowledgement. Dan Meyerhoff with Association of Conservation Districts played a big role. The coordinator of this project and the writer is Sarah Green, and her business entity before she took on this project was Prairie Meadowlark LLC. So it seemed only fitting. Of course, I knew Sarah and her interest and ability that we have her as a part of that, and I want to make sure that you note on the second page our acknowledgments, and both Dan and Sarah are here, so it may be pertinent to have them help respond to any questions if you so desire, Madam Chair. And also, our staff in our Division of Conservation and our communication staff did the layout and a lot of the fine tuning of this document, and I want to publicly thank them as well.
Thank you, Secretary Beam. This is a pretty amazing publication. Any questions, Representative Roth?
Do you know if there is any value whatsoever to these red cedars that you're talking about, or to any other invasive type of plants that are coming into Kansas?
There is, but I know some folks have looked at it to make it biochar, which is a very good product, but it's so expensive. To get the facilities there or cut and haul those, that I don't know if the return on investment is quite there yet. But that would be the one that I've heard the most about. There's probably some value in the wood for furniture, but that would only be your larger trees, the real large trees. There's a lot of expense, of course, in cutting and drying and processing that. So far, we haven't found anything close to the value. That value equals the cost of removing them.
Thank you very much. And also, do you know maybe what it does cost? Because like in my area in South Central Kansas, we're seeing these trees just proliferate like out of control. In fact, there's one farmer that I go and I manually hand cut trees out of his the hedgerows and around his fields and stuff like that, which I'm very glad to do. But what's the cost of some of these bigger fields where you've got, maybe 1,000 or more trees out in there? If you don't know, that's okay. But my opinion as an uneducated farmer or rancher, because I'm not, something needs to be done about this, because they're just taking control, and it doesn't look good, and it could cause problems, I think. Thank you.
Yeah. I could get with Natural Resource Conservation Service. They help on cost share, and so have some various rates. But a lot of those are the heavier, thick populated one. It makes most sense using mechanical, because it's a lot of chainsaws when it's almost completely thick with those. The one thing I might have just minimized is the fire hazard. I know there's parts of the state, actually, you may have seen recently, several years ago, a retirement home in Yates Center went up in flames because the cedar trees to the south of it, in a high wind situation, they could not control and stop it. Fortunately, all the people that lived in there and worked in there were able to get them out. And I just read where somewhere, I'm trying to get my hands on it, but apparently there was a risk management report done for the risk for the city of Manhattan. And they claim that under right circumstances with high winds and dry conditions, if you're familiar at all, there's lots of eastern red cedars, very thick on the whole south side of Manhattan. And they claim that 75% of Manhattan could be impacted by a major wildfire. So I want to find that report, but so there's a lot of communities that have a lot of risks just from the homes and the people standpoint as well.
Representative Roth.
On the grasslands, I was driving late Sunday afternoon, up 35, and for some reason to me, it appeared that the grass, which is dead at this time, was just a really bright yellow gold. And I have actually been driving up that interstate since the late 80s when I worked for the state and back and forth to Topeka and all around the state. But I'd never seen it like it was yesterday. Have I missed something all these years, or is there something that causes that? But it was just a bright yellow gold. I mean, literally all the way up there. It was beautiful. So.
Yeah, a lot of it's dependent upon the moisture and the timing of the moisture from the previous year. And, there's a lot of photographs with a lot of orange cast to it. I will tell you that what I'm starting to learn is sometimes the old rural bluestem, which is not a desirable grass, can be very thick, and it can put out a pretty color. So and it's more predominant along the right-of-ways. So that could have been what you've seen is the old rural bluestems. But photographers that like to take pictures of grasslands like to do it all seasons, and you can understand why.
Any other questions? Ranking Carlin.
Madam Chair, years ago, someone from Cottonwood Falls that we all know, Suzanne Barnes, I believe, is one that called my attention to the cedars coming into Manhattan. My brother was a conservationist, and he was trying to get something done about it. What can be done when trees are on private property? There's homes there that I assume, want the privacy provided by that. We have a land use plan for that area. Supposed to be nothing between the highway and 250 feet back, but if you've been there, you can see that didn't work. It's junky and cars and stuff. But do we have the ability to offer funding or legislation on something like that? I just didn't know what we can actually accomplish, and maybe that's where you're headed with some of this.
Yeah, that's really difficult from a legislative standpoint. I do know that it's actually in Reno County where they actually put some resources up to help people at least get it away from the highway far enough that they had more of a fire break, because the cedar trees were coming right up to the.
Well, there's no fire break in that section that I'm talking about.
I think we need more outreach and information, because there's quite frankly some very expensive homes that are right in the middle of a forest of eastern red cedar. And when I was working with the governor's wildfire task force, we had some volunteer firefighters that were there, and they said, I basically go into those areas and tell them that we'll do our best, but we probably cannot stop the fire if it gets in your area because of these trees. And so I don't think the insurance companies have stepped in yet, but it's just, I think, a lot of education and awareness of, that they're really a prairie that's been converted to trees, and it'd be safer and better for everybody if we could thin these out and restore some prairie.
I have a friend who has a ranch that she goes out and cuts them, just that's what she does every day that she's not doing something else that's.
Yeah, ranchers used to like to go out on a drive on Sunday sometimes. Now they take the four-wheeler with a chainsaw and
Yeah.
cut a few trees along the way.
I was going to ask you too, I read the history of Kansas when we had no trees, and it was apparently birds that spread the seeds and whatever, Johnny Appleseed and all that. But what about wildlife if well, I guess it's mostly birds. Would it be a huge impact on the bird population if we cleaned up some of these ranch lands? I mean, I don't want the trees, but.
I think it all depends on the species. There's a lot of grassland nesting birds that numbers have dropped considerably. So if you remove most of the trees, you'll see some increase in enhancement in some species of birds.
Okay.
Perhaps the
Could be a shift.
raptors and others, but gosh, I can't imagine that we'll ever run out of opportunities and places for them to perch.
I might. I've been seeing articles written about hunting preserves buying up land, and I know we've got a lot of hunting areas in Kansas, and I know it's got a lot of positive impacts for Kansas, but also the price of land has gone up so high because of people wanting to buy it and conserve it for hunting. And I'm just, would that be something they would want the trees or not want the trees? I mean, does that have an impact on the allowing the trees to grow?
Anecdotally, we heard repeatedly that has property that's been purchased and managed for hunting had been purposely allowed to grow up in trees.
That's what I would assume. And so I can see the education is going to be a chore, but I would really support any way I could help with that. And I've been asked by ranchers to do something about the trees, especially with absent landlords. That's why I'm asking if there would be grants or legislation that we could put some teeth into for people who don't live here and don't see that land going like that. And I know they're not totally ignorant of it, but maybe they just have other places to spend their cash.
I think that's part of the awareness and education. Maybe that's an audience that needs to be targeted, and that's those who don't.
Are you offering the ag department to get involved in some
I'm
of that?
sure we're going to be involved at some point. I told the group that sometime here later this summer and early fall, we'd get back together and look at some of these action items. Have we accomplished any of those? When I say we, it's other interests as well, and what should be a priority in the next few years. And we may come back with some legislative proposals.
Thank you. Thank you for being here about this. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Rogers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, as always, I mean, not to get too, but I mean, Mr. Secretary, this is your legacy. I mean, really, this is, and the work you've done on fire management and leadership through KLA and now here. So I hope there's many years that you can kind of shepherd some of this through. Eastern red cedars, they're a problem. I think the problem has gotten out of hand that we don't know how to address it. You know, I've seen some young entrepreneur folks go get a skid steer and one of those little clippers and try to do that, and call them up and see how much they'll charge you to do that. It is several. You have to run a lot of cow. You have to rent for a lot of cows. Those of us don't have, but I guess that's the thing is, as in all these discussions, was there, we are working on a state water plan now. And we know through research and other just analysis that by removing, especially in certain areas, as your map kind of shows too, that we can gain water back. Tree per mile is much less than southwest Kansas, but looking at north central Kansas, where you and I are both from, we can gain back some water. We can gain back that lush prairie. We happen to be lucky the last year or so because we got some timely, moisture over the winter time, so we were able to have grass throughout the grazing season. But as we look at moving forward and putting together that plan for the state water plan, shouldn't this be kind of a part of it? And maybe it's not just the eastern red cedar, but cottonwood trees, all those along the rivers and creeks, you just take up an awful lot of water. But or is that such a big issue that it's got to be the NRCS? Is that something the state can even try to tackle?
Well, I think it's part of it. And I know the Water Authority has had some discussion about the role that these invasive trees have had and are having. So we might be able, I think we could leverage with NRCS funds and others, especially if we do it in a very targeted way where there needs to be some more stream flow.
Madam Chair, and that's what I'm wondering is, because if you look at the state, there's different needs for, say, the west or that central, but in the eastern part of the state, they're still there. They're still there, and as they do more development. And yes, Manhattan is a great example. I know years ago when we started having some of these wildfires, Hutchinson was really the bullseye, and some of this action was actually done by the legislature because of those homes out there in the north end of town by the golf course. And so, but again, we don't want to tell people where they can and can't build, but it's also kind of buyer beware. And I think they've done a pretty good job of letting folks know, but maybe that's the way to handle it is, as we do so many of these other things where we do tests or we do targets for, certain areas or try, because it's kind of like dredging a reservoir. You can spend a lot of money awful quickly. So that was kind of it. Or was there anything, I guess, did anything surprise you when after all the meetings, when you finally got a chance to kind of, when they got compiled together, was there something that you said, well, I never thought about that, or I didn't know that was such a big concern for landowners?
Yeah, and I will respond. If you don't mind, I wouldn't mind letting Sarah respond as well, if it's okay with you, because she was newer. A lot of this was new to her. But I think what surprised me is people showed up at these meetings that I had never met before. I used to travel the state for years, met with ranchers, and very passionate. I mean, all ages, and they provided some really interesting quotes that are laced through this book. So I don't think the content, none of that surprised me, but the people that came forward and the amount of passion that they had, that surprised me.
Thank you, Secretary Beam. And with that, we will welcome Sarah Green to the microphone. Please explain your role in this whole endeavor. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Last year, summer, Secretary Beam called and asked if I would be willing to take on a project that was a direct result of the conversations he'd been having with ranchers across Kansas. And together with Dan Meyerhoff from the Association of Conservation Districts, we put together what resulted in the issue brief that you see before you. You asked about surprises, and I think I would say the same thing. I have been adjacent to the agriculture world. I worked for the Kansas Department of Agriculture about 15 years ago now, but I remember when I started working there, I felt like I wasn't a good enough Kansan because I didn't understand water. This is such a big deal to our state. And I had a similar realization again with grasslands. 30% of our state, and I don't think we know very much about them unless we are in the industry. So I spent my summer riding around in pickup trucks with strange men to learn more about ranching and grasslands in Kansas. And I really want to make sure, this is a little bit more into the process piece, but something that I think is really smart, as far as this project was designed, we worked with 4 ranchers very closely. Secretary Beam talked about different people showing up to meetings. Like, that's the gold standard of a good meeting when you don't know everyone in the room. But it really was because there were 4 ranchers who extended their social capital in ways that are far beyond what they had to do, but they did it because it was important to them. They helped us invite people to the listening sessions who were willing to come up with good ideas and not just come to complain. So what a joy to work with about 50 ranchers in the state. We estimated they represented about 300,000 acres, so a good portion of our state's grasslands. And I do want to mention their names because some of them are close to some of your districts. We had Russell Blue in the Gypsum Hills, Daniel Mushrush in the Flint Hills, Cade Rensink in the Smoky Hills, and Stacy Hamey in the High Plains. So they helped us do everything from finding good places to meet to doing the invitations, and their work is reflected in this report. I think, too, in terms of surprises, we asked them to do something different than they're normally asked to do. When you have good ideas and you're willing to come to meetings, you do get invited to a lot of meetings, and they came anyway, which is, again, a huge compliment, I think, to Secretary Beam and the team. But we had them sort of write the paper. The action steps that you'll see in the back, and I'll just give you a little really quick overview of this. If you are asked to make decisions about grasslands, this may be a good resource for you. It's just an overview of what they are, where they are in Kansas, the consequences of losing them, and then the action steps to protect them. And the action steps came directly out of these meetings. We took everything we heard. There are 5, they're not policy recommendations. They really are like topics that people highlighted that they want to see something done. And we didn't let them off the hook when we said, what's an issue that concerns you? We asked them, what do you think we should do about it? So they're in orange in your book, what we heard, the information that supports what we heard, and then the action steps. So if somebody sees a way for themselves to plug into this work, they don't have to figure it out. This is what the industry supports, this is what Kansans support. So it was pretty exciting to get to work on something that was this collaborative, again, created by a community and not just certain groups. Does that, okay. Mm-hmm.
Anyone else have questions for Ms. Green? Thank you very much for being here. Any other questions for Representative White? Sorry about that. I had your name down.
That's perfectly fine. I'm overlooked often. Thank you, Secretary, for a great presentation. I'd want to, and thank you for calling my district and me personally out.
Beautiful country, by the way.
Yes, my neighbors are screaming about red cedars and the hunters are buying these big ranches that are used to support 4 or 5 families out there. So it's snowballed into hurting our grocery stores, our small communities, and they're screaming for answers. And screaming at me like I actually have answers. So I would really appreciate any help on this. But my question is, as long as I remember, there were fires in the Flint Hills, prescribed burning. It's almost like a culture or something. I don't know how long it's been, but how do we spread that culture west where it would really help the red cedar problems?
I think a lot has been done the last 5-10 years, but you're right. And those ranchers, most of the ranchers in particularly your area realize they've got to get more prescribed burning on the ground. But, you know, you've got local fire officials to work with, neighbors, communities. And one of the biggest tools that's helped are these prescribed fire associations, where a group of people, you can have an organization, and part of the requirement is you have to bring equipment, have equipment, and then they take turns helping each other burn their ranch. And they're trained, so it lessens the risk, and it just seems to kind of feed upon itself, because other neighbors get to seeing the value of the land that's been burnt, and you don't have to burn as often either in your area as you do in the eastern part of the state to have the effect. So I think more support for those prescribed fire associations, and we tried to get out of them what we could do to help, and we'll continue to have those discussions. But more awareness and understanding of prescribed fire, and that's not just about grasslands, but a big part of it is why prescribed fire is important. How did we get here in the first place? It was grazers and fire before people. Grazers and fire.
If I may. Thank you for that. We're really skittish out there. The Starbucks fire burns 600,000 acres, which is usually about how big a county is. And it burned for 3 days, and people understand the benefits of fire, but they're really skittish. So I appreciate that answer. And the association may be the way to go.
And part of the reason that was so, or the main reason that was so uncontrollable, were the trees. I mean, if it had been grasslands like on the cover, I think that even though the winds were, 50, 75 mile an hour, still it's not as explosive as the cedar trees are when the fire hits those.
Can you describe Oklahoma's having passed a law to, I think it's water conservation. Can you describe what that law is? Do you know in Oklahoma what they're doing for these red cedars?
I've just studied it a little bit, and I know one of the things that they did was they had their Forest Service discontinue the selling of eastern red cedars. That I'm not. I mean, that's, I can get in with folks who love their windbreaks too, and I don't want to go down that road. But that's just one small thing. And they actually, I think, appropriated some money a few years ago to help clip and burn some of those areas. But they've got a lot further to go than we do.
Thank you for that.
Representative Curtis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I assume that managing this, and I looked at that map and it looks like it's marching east to west. I think those of us in the eastern part in Kansas City and all need some education on what we need to be doing to help as well. So just a couple of questions. One is, what advice would you give for people in urban areas that we too can be part of the solution? And then number two, I would imagine that there's like a lot of coordination across agencies that can help to also address it. And if you could just talk a little bit, I know you mentioned like KDOT and clearing the right-of-ways. I don't know if that's extending to like some of the city and county agencies that also clear right-of-ways, but then, you know, also our state parks, but then we also have a lot of city and county parks. So can you talk a little bit about like how you're kind of working cross-section?
Well, we need to get there. We haven't to an extent, and you reminded me that you know, your area has you know, really healthy, large park system. And I haven't studied to know, you know, are they managing it as a prairie, or are they managing it as a forest, or both? But I think that's part of the outreach, and perhaps this new person that we have that would be with our Department of Conservation can can help start having those educational outreach to not just our state agencies, but our locals as well. You know, one of the quotes that's in here, it's on the bottom of page 3, and this was by a forestry specialist, but I think this really, it's not just conservation, it's probably life in general, but in the end, we will conserve only what we love, we will love only what we understand, and we will understand only what we are taught. So that supports the need for more education and awareness.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I know we often hear about, oceans and mountains, but I think people just don't realize how beautiful the prairie is and our grasslands. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions? If not, I have a couple. So in northeast Kansas, on the north edge of the Flint Hills, we have informal neighbor groups where, hey, you're going to burn this year, and we all get together and do the same. It's not an organized group, but it is a neighborhood working group, if you will, that seems to work pretty well. Burning, spraying, anytime you get to the edge of your property and, someone else is across the fence, that can be tough from time to time. I guess I just wanted to throw that out there because it is. If you can comment on that, I'd appreciate it.
That is, there is probably more burning in some of these larger intact areas because there's less neighbors to deal with. And especially if you get 2 or 3 neighbors who want to work together and burn at the same time, you can really start making an impact. But we have areas, that have a lot of, 20 acres, 40 acres, a home. Maybe they have an idea on, they just don't want their area to be burnt. So setting the backfires and working around it just really adds to the complexity of it. But can inhibit prescribed burning. So it's a challenge.
Okay, and right now, I know it was brought up in, by the ranchers and brought up in this committee. Is there anything that can be done to those parcels of land that have been purchased solely for hunting and allowed to just grow up into whatever Mother Nature wants? Is there anything that can be done now?
From a policy standpoint?
From any standpoint?
Well, I just barely touched the surface of it, but I think we need to get a handle on the quantity of lands such as that are no longer used for agriculture and can't be used for agriculture because it's being managed or unmanaged in that way. I don't know how many of those would do that if they had a different property tax structure. So I think, but before we go there, before I want to make any recommendation, I'd like to get a feel for the numbers and what that impact may be.
Okay, thank you for
And
that.
I think there has been discussions in the past about non-resident versus resident deer hunting laws too. So that could always be looked at as, is there a way to disincentivize that?
Thank you. I appreciate those comments. Also, anybody would be welcome anytime to bring a hand nippers or whatever to my place, because that is my therapy during the month of March, except it hasn't been since I've been down here. But yeah, just walking and cutting is very satisfying. So I have heard at one point in time, and I don't know what size the cedar tree would be, but they can take almost 30 gallons of water a day. Is that like an average size one, large?
I would consider that a medium size based on some of the graphics I've seen.
Yeah, so just imagine getting rid of the cedars and how much water would go back down
So
for
in that
us.
fire that Representative White alluded to, I had multiple ranchers tell me that once the fire went through, within hours, I mean, this is an area that was just thickly populated with eastern red cedars, big eastern red cedars. Within hours, streams started flowing and creeks started flowing that hadn't flown for years. So I mean,
Yeah.
it's a big draw.
Yeah. And one more question. Tell us a little bit more about your vision for the Grassland Partnership Manager that will hopefully get all the way through the budget.
Well, there's a good list of organizations in here. It's probably not all encompassing that work with and help support of grasslands. Some have a strong conservation aspect, some more of an agriculture, and they collaborate quite a bit. But I think that this person can help in exchanging information about what each other's doing. Do a lot more outreach to other forms of government that would have an interest in it, kind of help us fine tune an educational plan that we've talked about. And I think it would show the ranchers that, that the state has seen and heard them, and we have actually put somebody that wakes up in the morning and that's their responsibility.
Thank you very much. One more question for Mr. Meyerhoff, possibly. With the HB 2063 that's coming up, the conservation bill, will there be an opportunity in there for farmers and ranchers to seek money to control some of these invasive species?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to address that and the rest of the committee. Absolutely. That is one of the primary purposes for 2063, especially on the working lands portion of that bill. An opportunity to address some of the things that there are not the current resources to address, for, assisting farmers and ranchers with addressing those critical resource issues.
Appreciate that update. Any further questions or comments about grasslands in Kansas? Seeing none, thank you to KDA and thank you to Ms. Green for your work. Thank you, Mr. Meyerhoff, for your part in this, and we are adjourned. Oh, tomorrow we're going to hear all about the Wheat Innovation Center.